This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. In a candid one-on-one with CNA, Nvidia boss Jensen Huang says that the company is not stepping back from the tech showdown between major powers, despite losing ground in China. But China's chip race is heating up too. Huawei says that its latest design breakthrough could help narrow the gap with TSMC and produce advanced semiconductors within 5 years, despite US sanctions. It's confirmed. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is preparing a $19 billion supplementary budget to cushion the economic hit from surging costs linked to the Iran war. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has met Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Beijing, as Islamabad says that US-Iran mediation has made significant progress and is moving in the right direction. Also tonight, a new batch of astronauts arrives at China's space station. One of them will call it home for the next 12 months. And rising to the occasion, competitors at Hong Kong's Bun Festival on a roll in a century-old tradition to usher in an abundance of good luck. A U.S. chip juggernaut, Nvidia, is standing firm on its commitment to doing business in China, where U.S. export controls have limited its growth. Founder and chief executive Jensen Huang, in an interview with CNA, conceding that Chinese group Huawei has filled a void, but says that Nvidia continues to participate on many levels of the AI landscape. And for more, we are joined now by CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen, who got to sit down with the Nvidia chief a little earlier today. So, Victoria, what did Jensen Huang have to say about Nvidia's relationship with China?
Well, Jensen Huang made it very clear that Nvidia is not giving up on China. But he also said that U.S. export controls have changed the market in a big way. Huang said restrictions on advanced AI chips created space for Chinese companies like Huawei and local startups to grow quickly. He said that even if Nvidia's technology is stronger, Chinese companies will use whatever is available and improve from there. At the same time, Huang stressed that Nvidia still believes that it can add value to China's AI market if it is allowed to compete there. Now, let's listen to what he has to say. But reports suggest that China hasn't purchased any of the Nvidia's H200 chips, despite U.S. export approval.
We're not stepping back from China. I would say that the Chinese government, when we were banned from going to China through export controls, it left a vacuum that the Chinese companies were able to fill. And as a result, Huawei and many of the startup companies in China had record years. They are now growing at an incredible pace. And in our absence, even though NVIDIA's technology is better, it is, in our absence, available technology is the best you can get, and it's plenty good. The Chinese government is understandably, as every government would and should, encourage and want to have conditions for their local companies to be successful. However, I also believe that NVIDIA could add an enormous amount of value to the Chinese market.
As it pushes for its own chips, could that actually eventually make China your greatest rival?
Well, China is going to be everybody's greatest rival. I mean, that goes without saying, because they have such an extraordinary local market. It is completely uniform, just like the United States. For China, NVIDIA's technology competes with one layer of the five-layer cake. We compete with one layer of the five-layer cake, but don't forget, AI is a five-layer cake. And so when NVIDIA is participating in China and serving the Chinese market as we have in the past, it supports the expansion of the other 5 layers. And so when you look at the market in a more holistic way, and I surely believe that the leaders will, and the local markets will, when you look at it in the holistic way, NVIDIA could be of great service to that industry, and we could add a lot of value to the China market as well.
What stood out is that Huang sees China as both a major opportunity and a growing competitor. He said China could become everyone's rival because of the size of its market and how fast its AI industry is developing. But he also argued that AI is bigger than just chips. Huang described it as full ecosystem and said Nvidia still wants to be part of that growth in China. So his message was clear. Restricting China may slow Nvidia's business there, but it could also speed up China's push to build its own AI industry. Oteli?
Well, thanks for that. For now, CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen live from Taipei. Now, could AI lead to more job cuts? And can Taiwan maintain its strategic relevance in a global supply chain? Well, we'll be bringing you more insights from Victoria's interview with Nvidia CEO later this hour. Chinese President Xi Jinping has thanked Pakistan for its constructive role in mediating peace in the Middle East during his meeting with visiting Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Beijing. Calling the Pakistani leader an old friend, Mr. Xi says that Beijing is prioritizing ties with Islamabad among China's neighbors. Now, we've got Crystal Chia joining us now live from Shanghai for more. Crystal, what are going to be some of the top items on the agenda during this meeting?
Yeah, so we are just seeing some new lines coming in. State media reporting that during the meeting, they said that they share an unshakable 75-year friendship and that China always values this close partnership. They plan to expand cooperation across various sectors, deepen bilateral ties, and that they will work together on security matters. Now, the Pakistan Prime Minister is the third leader from the country to have visited China in the last 2 months, signaling a very back-to-back top-level push. Earlier, the president visited Hunan and Hainan, and the foreign minister also in March, at that time, to discuss tensions in the Middle East. Now, this meeting is coming as Pakistan is seeking support for its efforts to mediate the conflict between Iran and the U.S. Analysts say that Beijing would be reluctant to be drawn directly into the conflict, but would be willing to offer its support for peace efforts. And indeed, during the foreign minister's visit to Beijing in March, they had a 5-point initiative. Foreign Minister Wang Yi at that meeting, had also earlier asked Pakistan to step up its mediation efforts.
So, Crystal, tell us why ties with Pakistan is so important to China.
So observers say that the timing of this trip, coming right after visits by U.S. and Russian presidents, they help China to signal its role as a global stabilizer. That it is still prioritizing its core allies and the global south. But both countries still face a balancing act, especially as the U.S. steps up its outreach to Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is one of China's closest partners, supporting Beijing on a range of sensitive issues from Taiwan to Xinjiang, Tibet, and the South China Sea. In exchange, Beijing has invested billions into the country through CPEC, that's an economic corridor under China's Belt and Road project. So the meetings today, they conclude Mr. Sharif's 4-day trip. He was in Hangzhou earlier. This is a city about 2-hour drive from Shanghai. And in Hangzhou, he met with companies such as Alibaba and CATL, signed a sister province agreement and other agreements worth $1.2 billion. Oteli?
Well, Krista Chia live in Shanghai. Thanks for that report. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is set for a 4-day state visit to Japan starting tomorrow. The leader has a packed itinerary, including holding a summit meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, and also to be welcomed by Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako at the Imperial Palace. Now, for more on what would be Philippine President Marcos Jr.'s first state visit to Japan, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida, who is speaking to us from Tokyo. Mitch, what does Marcos's state visit to Japan indicate about relations between Japan and the Philippines?
Well, Japanese government official told me that it's a relationship between like-minded nations And basically, Japan hosts just one state visit a year. Last year, it was President Luiz Lula of Brazil to celebrate 130 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations with Brazil. And with the Philippines, Japan celebrates 70 years since normalizing relations. Now, another reason to host Mr. Marcos this time is with the highest possibility of hospitality is that the Philippines is ASEAN chair. Also, Japan positions the Philippines as an important partner to achieve its ambition of a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is a concept introduced by then Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister, 10 years ago. Media reports suggest the two countries will upgrade their relationship from a strategic one to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which is regarded as the highest level relationship with another country for the Philippines.
And when Marcos meets Takaichi, what sort of topics are likely to dominate their conversation?
Well, actually, President Marcos talked to Japanese media ahead of his Tokyo visit. He said discussing security cooperation is vital. Now, this includes information, technology sharing, and joint drills. Now, one significant exercise Japan's self-defense force for the first time is participating in is in the multinational drill, which includes the Philippines, called Balikatan 26. Now, Japan, for the first time, tested its Type 88 ground-to-surface missile system outside of its own country. And if you recall, in April, Prime Minister Takaichi's government decided to ease its transfer of defense equipment. Mr. Marcos told Japanese media he wished to know the Japanese government's thinking behind this. Now, Tokyo thinks the Philippines is interested in acquiring Japan's second-hand Abukuma-class destroyer. So far, Japan's official security assistance program, the Japanese received a coastal and air surveillance radar system. And this year, Japan will help construct boat houses and slipways for rigid-hulled inflammable boats, which Japan has previously offered. And to improve information and technology share, sources say the two countries will start to lay the groundwork for GSOMIA, or General Security of Military Information Agreement. Now, both Japan and the Philippines face common security concerns when it comes to China. Philippine boats have been harassed, and in and around Okinawa's Senkaku Island, which China also claims and called Diaoyi, Chinese and Japanese Coast Guard vessels have been watching over each other. Whatever may happen in the Taiwan Straits could impact the security environment for the two countries, as they are both geographically close.
Well, many thanks for unpacking Japan-Philippines ties. CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. Staying in Japan, more than a dozen people were taken to hospital after a man sprayed an unknown substance in a crowded area in Tokyo. Well, the incident happened on the first floor of the Ginza 6 luxury shopping mall. At least 25 people reported feeling unwell, many complaining of a sore throat. The fire department sent more than 50 vehicles to the scene. Japanese broadcaster NTV says that security footage showed a man in a dark jacket and white pants spraying what appeared to be tear gas. Well, Tokyo police are now trying to identify and locate him.
匂いなし、色もなし。もう急に5メートルぐらい近づいたら喉が痛くなってむせて咳が出た。
Coming up on East Asia tonight, oil future prices extending their declines on hopes of a possible deal between US and Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And millions of Chinese are cutting up their credit cards in another sign of weak spending and a growing pain for banks already facing rising defaults. Hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and we've got Olivia Marzuki joining us now for the latest in business. Liv, big moves apparently in oil markets to start this week, and we're seeing crude prices falling sharply apparently. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I'll tell you. So energy traders are reacting to the fresh progress in U.S.-Iran talks and the signs of that progress, oil prices extending their declines on hopes for a possible deal between the two sides to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Brent now hovering at levels around $97 a barrel, WTI 91.80 cents. Both contracts falling around 5%. They're easing from recent highs sparked by the effective closure of the key energy corridor. Optimism is building over a possible diplomatic breakthrough. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said a deal could be announced as early as today, although several sticking points remain unsolved. There are reports of ships starting to move towards Hormuz in anticipation of a deal that would reopen the critical waterway. But analysts say that even if oil prices fall back on a deal, any sustained drop in oil prices will depend on production and refining facilities returning to pre-war operating levels. Optimism for a deal to end in the war in Iran, boosting demand for risk assets in the region. Japan's Nikkei 225 surging past the 65,000 level for the first time, ending the day nearly 3% to the upside. Mainland China stocks closed higher as well, lifted by the coal sector. The country's worst coal mine disaster in 17 years raised expectations that stricter safety, security, and scrutiny would tighten supply in China. Semiconductor shares also among top gainers in the market in Greater China. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi says her government will submit a supplementary budget of around $19 billion as early as next week. It is looking to relieve households of the burdens of rising energy costs brought on by the war on Iran. And that includes around $3 billion from contingency reserves to fund utility subsidies. Japan has also been extending separate subsidies to keep gasoline prices steady. Ms. Takaichi also announced a new fund that will be used to support measures to keep fuel prices affordable and among other things. The government has been dipping into its reserves to fund existing measures, and economists have been warning for weeks that the money is about to run out. But the PM is playing down the likely impact of government finances, saying that the extra budget will be financed by new deficit financing bonds, which could be implemented without affecting the bond market. Investors are rushing to find alternatives to buy and sell overseas equities after China began an unprecedented campaign against illegal cross-border trading to stem capital outflows. And this comes after 8 regulators issued a joint statement last week vowing a campaign against these trades. The government is going after unauthorized offshore investment services that have been targeting investors on the mainland. Under the new plan put out by the country's top securities regulator along with other government bodies, overseas firms will no longer be able to open accounts for Chinese clients, carry out trades on their behalf, or move their money across borders. And it's not just foreigners and foreign firms in the crosshairs. Domestic firms could also face actions if they're caught helping these offshore operations. The fallout likely to spread to Hong Kong as it threatens to curb the city's liquidity and its booming IPOs. CITIC Securities estimates that the clampdown could affect as much as $32 billion of assets in Hong Kong. The clampdown triggered swift reaction in markets last week. The Nasdaq Golden Dragon China Index slumping 2.2% at close on Friday. U.S.-listed shares of broker Futu Holdings also closing down 27%, with more than a quarter of its market value wiped out. Huawei says it has found a new way to make advanced chips, one that could help it work around U.S. restrictions. The Chinese tech giant has been under U.S. sanctions since 2019, cutting it off from key technologies used to make the world's most advanced semiconductors. But Huawei says it can now produce next-generation 1.4 nanometer chips by 2031. That would trail Taiwan's TSMC, which aims to reach that level by 2028. China is generally viewed as unlikely to reach that level through conventional manufacturing alone because of limited access to advanced lithography tools and other key semiconductor technologies. So instead of making transistors smaller, Huawei says it can make chips faster by shortening the time it takes different parts to a chip for a chip to communicate. The company says the approach is feasible, affordable, and able to compete with conventional chip making. Its next chip, Kirin, due later this year, will be the first to use a related design called logic folding, which would improve performance considerably. Analysts say that the move signals Huawei's ambition to lead in the global chip race and could raise new concerns in Washington. Millions of Chinese are giving up their credit cards as the economy continues to be dogged by weak consumer spending. A report by the People's Bank of China showed that the number of credit cards owned in the first 3 months of the year dropped by 9 million from the preceding quarter, extending a 14th straight quarter decline from the peak in September 2022. This decline impacting banks' profits, who are also facing higher default risks, and the non-performing loan ratio rises. Some banks have also tightened criteria for issuing new cards. Only about 40% of Chinese own credit cards, and the market faces competition from e-payment systems like Alipay and WeChat Pay. International issuers are also finding it hard to maintain a foothold in China, with HSBC pulling its credit card operations in 2024, citing difficulties in achieving profitability. That's all I have in business. I'll tell you back to you.
Well, thanks always, Olivia. Right, on that note, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, we'll be hearing more from Nvidia's Jensen Huang, including his scathing pushback against CEOs who blame job cuts on AI. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is preparing a $19 billion supplementary budget to cushion the economic hit from surging costs linked to the Iran war. Now, in a candid one-on-one with CNA, Nvidia boss Jensen Huang says that the company is not stepping back from the tech showdown between major powers, despite losing ground in China. But China's chip race is heating up too. Huawei says that its latest design breakthrough could help narrow the gap with TSMC and produce advanced semiconductors within 5 years, despite U.S. sanctions. Now, Taiwan semiconductor giant TSMC is diversifying operations to the U.S., and there are fears of whether the island can maintain its strategic relevance in the global supply chain. But speaking to CNA's Victoria Jen in Taipei, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang remains hopeful of Taiwan's potential.
Of course, Nvidia spends, at this point, hundreds of billions of dollars in AI infrastructure, and most of our spend is in Taiwan. And so we've invested through the best form of investment, which is business, hundreds of billions of dollars into Taiwan.
What kind of role do you think Taiwan plays?
AI is at the center of Taiwan, and the companies on this island are incredible, as you know. The companies are at the epicenter of the possibility of AI and the growth of AI, the advancement of AI. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's growing incredibly here in Taiwan. The energy pressure is high, the land pressure is high, and of course, Taiwan is extraordinary at manufacturing. And I hope we talk about robotics and how robotics is going to revolutionize and transform Taiwan's ability to continue to grow at an incredible pace. No region is better prepared for the continued growth of AI than Taiwan, and I absolutely continue to expect Taiwan to grow at an outpaced, a very accelerated pace for many years to come.
Well, companies across industries have announced job cuts as they channel resources towards AI investment, from banks such as HSBC and Standard Chartered to tech giants such as Meta. Headcounts have been slashed. But Mr. Huang has a harsh word for CEOs who connect job cuts to AI.
I think the narrative that connects AI to job loss, for many of the CEOs that are doing it, it is just too lazy. It's just too lazy. AI has just arrived. How is it possible they're already losing jobs? You know, how is it possible that AI became productive and useful only 6 months ago, and they were canceling, they were somehow laying people off 2 years ago because of AI? It doesn't make any sense. It was just a way for them to sound smart, and I really hate that. I think we're scaring people, and that's irresponsible. I think we should tell a balanced story, a balanced narrative about the potential of this technology, the importance of advancing it safely, security, guardrailed with necessary social, political, government, industrial policies to ensure that it advances safely.
What do you say to people who are afraid of losing their jobs to AI?
I would say to the people who are worried about losing their jobs to AI to learn AI. You're not going to lose your jobs to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who learned AI better than you. My point is, it's more likely that AI will elevate your job, elevate the purpose of your job if you became expert at it. Try to engage it. Don't be afraid of it. Of course, the industry has to be really thoughtful about building AI in a safe way, in a guardrailed way, and make sure that it's deployed in a proper way, and that the end applications, whether it's in healthcare or transportation or manufacturing, or air travel or whatever it is that applies AI, those industries have lots of regulations already, and they should reevaluate their regulations to be AI ready, to be AI prepared. And so everybody has to be part of this.
And you can find out more about Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang's succession plans on Asia tonight at 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And of course, we've got more on our interview with the Nvidia chief across CNA social media platforms, as well as an article on CNA.Asia. And come Friday evening, don't miss CNA correspondent, a conversation with Jensen Huang. The nearly 1 hour interview goes on air at 7:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. It will be available on our YouTube channel same evening. Now, India is set to host a meeting of Quad foreign ministers in New Delhi tomorrow, days after U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to China. The bloc consists of India, the US, Japan, and Australia. It has not met for nearly a year. And experts are saying that the meeting, which coincides with Secretary of State Marco Rubio's first visit to India, will be aimed at reviving the bloc. Neha Punia files this report for CNA from New Delhi.
This is the first time the bloc's foreign ministers will meet since July 2025. India announced the visit last week when U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed his attendance at the summit while flying out of the U.S. He's called the bloc important and said the group will hold another meeting later in the year as well. New Delhi says the foreign ministers will exchange views on advancing Quad cooperation, recent developments in the Indo-Pacific region, and other, quote, international issues of mutual concern. Experts say the meeting is important, especially coming as it does when the war in Iran and resetting ties with Beijing have been bigger priorities for the Trump administration.
This is an effort to be seen both by Washington and New Delhi to convey, at least symbolically, to the world that the Quad remains one of the most important anchors institutionally for maintaining and delivering of public goods and economic and political security to the Indo-Pacific.
The bloc is a non-security grouping and was revived by Donald Trump in 2017 following concerns over China's growing influence, both economic and military, in the Indo-Pacific. Chinese leaders have often criticized the group, but in his second term, President Trump has worked to reset ties with China. His administration has also admitted that Beijing is more of an economic rival rather than a strategic one. And that has raised questions about the group's relevance in this day and age.
this is going to be sort of a trip where reassurance to the Indo-Pacific is happening. You will also see that, I think there will be a managing of expectations because on the American front, principally, the ask has always been of burden sharing. And I think those were, maritime security, maritime domain awareness, where can all four countries do more together in terms of convergence, which is Southeast Asia.
The US says the Quad will discuss supporting regional security and diversifying critical mineral supply chains, and that the meeting going ahead emphasizes the importance of the Quad partnership. The meeting will also likely be a precursor to an eventual leaders summit, which was meant to happen last year but was delayed because of trade tensions between India and the US. There's still no clarity if it will be held this year, but India will be hopeful, experts say, of getting more clarity on that once the Quad foreign ministers sit down for talks. For CNA, I'm Neha Punia in New Delhi.
U.S. President Donald Trump says that his country's eventual agreement with Iran will either be a meaningful one or there will be no deal. This comes after he told American negotiators not to rush into a deal. It comes a day after he said an agreement was largely negotiated, one that would include the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Well, he posted on his Truth social platform saying that Iran must understand it cannot develop or procure a nuclear weapon. Mr. Trump described talks as constructive, but said that both sides had to take time to get it right. He says a U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports will remain until an agreement is reached. We're taking a swipe at the Obama administration's 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran. Mr. Trump says his deal will be, quote, a good and proper one because he doesn't do bad deals. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, echoed President Trump's remarks, saying the deal is a work in progress. He says that Washington will give diplomacy every chance to succeed before exploring alternatives.
So we have what I think is a pretty solid thing on the table in terms of their ability to open up the straits, get the straits open, enter into a very real, significant, time-limited negotiation on the nuclear matters. And hopefully we can pull it off. It has a lot of support in the Gulf.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he and Mr. Trump agree that any final deal must end what he calls Iran's nuclear threat. Tehran says differences remain with Washington. It disputes Mr. Trump's claim that reopening the Strait of Hormuz is in the agreement. China, responding to the developments, has reiterated that dialogue and negotiation are the way out of the crisis.
对话的大门既然打开，就不应当再次关上，应当稳住局势的缓和势头，坚持政治解决的大方向，通过对话协商达成兼顾各方关切的解决方案，尽快重开航道，回应国际社会的呼声，共同维护全球产供链的稳定畅通。尽快达成全面持久停火，推动中东海湾局势早日恢复和平稳定。
Professor Stephen Zunes from the University of San Francisco tells us how Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz has given it an advantage in negotiations for a ceasefire.
Unfortunately, I think the Iranians have recognized they do have the power to enforce some degree of control over what should be an international waterway. But unfortunately, thanks to Trump and Netanyahu's war, they recognize they have this power, they have this authority to assert this. And while there are many reasons to object to Iran having this amount of control of this vital maritime choke point, there don't seem to be many good alternatives. I mean, the stalemate obviously cannot stay. I mean, given all the economic damage and the like, but returning to war would just make things worse. So it appears that the United States and its Arab allies are just trying to make the best of a bad situation that does ultimately put Iran in a stronger position overall than it was when the hostilities commenced back in late February. I do believe that unlike some of the issues that are being discussed where there is some latitude for interpretation, that we will see greater freedom of movement, maybe not 100% as it was prior, but certainly enough to try to ease the pain that this has caused to the Arab Gulf states themselves and of course, much of the international community, especially those of you in Asia. But to what extent this who will determine what comes through and what doesn't? I mean, there are certainly some sticking points to be concerned about, but again, I think all sides agree that the status quo is untenable, and any improvement will be welcome.
And you can get more on the war in Iran on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app, including analysis on how disputes over control of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's uranium stockpile could still derail negotiations. Our break's up next, but coming up next, we launch into China's latest space adventure and what it means to include the first astronaut from Hong Kong. Three Chinese astronauts from the Shenzhou 23 mission have safely arrived at the Tiangong space station following a lengthy docking process that lasted some 3 hours. They were welcomed by the Shenzhou 21 crew, kickstarting a crew handover process which could last a week or more, where they will be working together to transfer station management and supplies needed in the coming months. The Shenzhou 23 spacecraft lifted off as scheduled at 11:08 p.m. last night from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in Gansu Province. The crew includes flight engineer Zhu Yangzhu, pilot Zhang Zhiyuan, and payload specialist Li Jiaying, a former Hong Kong police officer and the first astronaut from the city to join a Chinese space mission. Now, prior to lifting off, the three-member crew were given a send-off at a ceremony at the launch center. China's space agency says the astronauts selected for a year-long stay in orbit will be announced later, depending on the mission's progress. Now, the extended flight would mark a record duration for China, allowing scientists to study the effects of long-duration spaceflight on the human body.
中国载人航天一路走来，从一人一天到多人多天，到现在即将突破1年期的在轨驻留，这一个又一个全新的首次，串起了中国航天事业一次次发展突破的步伐。
Well, the mission is also part of China's preparations to send humans to the moon by 2030 amid an accelerating space race with the U.S. The outgoing Shenzhou 21 crew is expected to set a new record for China's longest crewed spaceflight, having already spent more than 200 days in orbit.
任务主要的目的是与神舟21号乘组完成在轨轮换，继续开展空间科学与应用工作，实施航天员出舱活动及货物进出舱，进行舱外载荷和舱外设施设备安装与回收等任务，开展科普教育和公益活动，以及空间搭载试验，持续发挥空间站综合应用效益。
Right, for more, we are joined now by Professor Quentin Parker, Director at the Lab for Space Research at the University of Hong Kong. Well, thanks, Professor Parker, for joining us yet again. So I know that you've championed the historic inclusion of Hong Kong payload specialist Lai Kai-ying on the Shenzhou 23 flight. What does this moment actually say about Hong Kong's place in China's space ambition?
Well, I think it shows that a city like Hong Kong has what it takes to be part of it. I think this was a strategic decision for both Macau and Hong Kong to have taikonauts trained under their taikonaut program. And Lai Kai-ying, I should pronounce that properly, it's in Cantonese, is the first Hong Konger born and bred to be part of that program. So that's extremely significant for our city. She's actually an expert payload specialist because she's come from forensic science and computing background. And this is what she did in the police force. She's actually a graduate of Hong Kong U, my university. She did her master's and PhD there. And so that was very proud for my university as well. So it's a very proud moment for our city. I think she's going to perform extremely well as a payload specialist. She's not military background, so it's almost like a civilian, another civilian going into the space station. That's the second one, actually. There was another one a little earlier. So this is a really important milestone for our city. She's only the fourth woman as well to go into space from China, and so there's many firsts here. And I should just make a little point about, you said the long docking. In fact, 3.5 hours is really short. It takes almost 16 to 19 hours for the International Space Station crew to dock, and China's kind of automated it, and it's actually really efficient now.
Right. Thanks for that clarification there, Professor Parker. We can always count on you on that. I want to pick up on what you said about you saying that Hong Kong has what it takes. So Kai-Ying, she's going up as a payload specialist, not the commander, not the pilot. So for viewers who may not understand, viewers and myself who don't understand the distinction, what does that actually tell us about the kind of expertise Hong Kong is actually bringing to this mission?
Well, it's the training as a forensic scientist, the attention to detail, they're able to do tasks repeatedly and accurately. Don't forget that the Tiangong space station basically is one huge laboratory experiment. There's about 100 experiments planned for this particular mission. There have been many experiments done in previous Shenzhou missions, of course. And so this is a very important part of the overall space program for China, to use the microgravity environment on board such a space station to do all sorts of very valuable investigations into material science, manufacturing space, growing things in space, physiological things that you can do, drug development, 3D printing, so many different things that the Chinese scientists and international scientists, by the way, who have payloads on board for this process. And so she is going to be in charge of many of those experiments. You need someone who can calibrate the equipment, operate it accurately and professionally. If there's a problem, fix it, and know how to gather the data accurately and properly. And all these kinds of things require someone that has the right skill set professionally, scientifically, and accurately, and have the ability to actually work on the fly, sometimes troubleshoot, get things going. And so across a broad range of different kinds of experiments as well. So she'll be done all the training for that. And her work as a forensic scientist has put her in very good stead for that, I would say.
So there is a much bigger endurance test in this mission because one astronaut will be staying in orbit for a full year. Firstly, could Kai-Ying be that person? And secondly, what does this year-long mission allow China to test that a 6-month mission cannot?
Very good question. And first of all, just statistically, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of being picked, but it won't be on the basis of chance. China is extremely careful, assiduous about what it does, especially in space. And so they'll be looking at the overall performance of every taikonaut on board, but particularly they'll be looking at the physiological effects of space on each individual. They'll be taking, medical records continuously of these taikonauts, I would say, and they'll be looking at overall who they would recommend based on the overall body of evidence and data that have collected over the next few months or weeks until they decide, well, we think overall that this particular taikonaut is best suited to maximize what we will learn going forward. So there's a whole series of different decisions that will be made to come up with the final decision. I mean, they're all suitable because they've all been chosen. It's a very competitive program. You have to be super good even to get on board and be flying in space to start with. And so, of course, Lei Kai-Ying has passed everything with flying colours, I heard. There's been an accelerated program of training for her to get to the stage where she's now already on board, on the Tiangong space station after Shenzhou 23 got there. So it's very exciting for her, I'm sure. She has a family. She's a mother of 3 as well. So she's got a lot going on. And this is perhaps one of the most exciting and important things she will have ever done in her entire life. And so that's a very important milestone for her personally. But if she was to be selected to be up there for a year, that's even more significant. And, it's not like that's the first human to have spent more than a year in space. The Russians have done it. And of course, you learn a lot. 6 months, your body changes. You start to lose muscle mass. you start to lose calcium from your bones. So after a year, that process progresses more. And so when, you've seen probably pictures of those astronauts and cosmonauts and have been up there for many months, and when they come down, they're very weak. They can, they need time to adjust to Earth's gravity. So the thing is, the difference between then and now, after many years since an astronaut, taikonaut, or cosmonaut, however you want to call it, spent such a long time in space, our ability to measure things more accurately, the kinds of tests we can do, have gone on. The technology and the medical science has progressed. So what we can learn now is probably a little bit more than you could have learned by doing those same tests 10 years ago, for example. So I think that's an important difference about this, and also it can, validate life support. It can look at the human physiology over a year's timeline in space rather than 6 months. And it can, of course, it, also shows that for the lunar basis of the plan, you're going to have taikonauts on the moon for extended periods of time, also in lower gravity, not as low as in microgravity, of course, 1/6 of the Earth on the moon. But nevertheless, this is part of the understanding. And China needs to have its own data. It can get data from the other missions that have been done in the past by the other space powers, but getting its own data, validating its own data, doing things in its way with its technologies is, very important for understanding and for their progress and for planning.
Well, fabulous insights as always. Thank you so much for unpacking China's big space mission. Professor Quentin Parker, Director of the Lab for Space Research at the University of Hong Kong. Right, and just before we go, we are going to take you to Hong Kong, where one of the city's quirkiest traditions has taken over the island yet again. Now, at the stroke of midnight, a dozen climbers raced up a 14-meter tower in the annual Chung Chao Bun Festival. 9 men, 3 women had just 3 minutes to grab as many buns as possible, with those placed highest worth the most points and believed to bring the greatest luck. Well, the contest is one of Hong Kong's oldest traditions, held on the outlying island of Cheung Chau. Residents have celebrated it for more than a century to ward off disaster and pray for peace and good fortune. The competition was suspended after a tower collapsed in 1978, injuring dozens before returning in 2005. It was later paused during the COVID-19 pandemic and resumed in 2023. And this year's newly crowned Bun King and Bun Queen were all smiles after defending their titles.
今年好開心啦，因為今年係我玩咗第11年啦，係最激烈競爭嘅一年咯。因為嘉欣喺我隔離啦，咁啊左邊係錢包三王啦，咁所以都好緊張嘅。咁我嘅目標就係快過嘉欣上頂咧，咁啊機會大啲啊。咁我最後都做到咁，所以好開心。同埋今年係連續第3年贏咯，咁所以就更加一份喜悅啦咁樣。
第11次攞冠軍啦，其實我覺得都好難得嘅。其實我頭先個狀態，我覺得係有啲攰啊，可能等得太耐咧，同埋開始嘅時候有少少失手，好彩跟住拿捏翻上翻追翻上去，咁啊攞翻足夠嘅9分包啦。
I hope you've enjoyed Monday's edition of East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and look us up on all socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow.